Hello, everyone. It's the UFO Mystery Podcast, and welcome back to the UFO Mystery Podcast. We've got the second of our episodes on titled ULAT-1, the Atomic Connection, and tonight we're going to continue our series of talks with our special guest, Jeff, who we engaged with in a very interesting discussion in Series 1 of the podcast, and which we looked at how the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Watergate, and the Atomic Connection were all inextricably linked to the UFO phenomenon and the Majestic 12 documents. And we've got Jeff on the line now. How are you, Jeff?
I'm good, thanks, Roger. Thanks for having me on again.
No worries. I'm really, really happy to have you on, and I'm really glad that you agreed to do this second podcast with us. So I've titled the talk tonight on ULAT-1, Atomic Connection, because we're going to be looking at a particular document called the Twining White-Hot Report, and that discusses alleged crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft of unknown origin, obviously. The document was written by General Nathan Twining in September of 1947, shortly following the Roswell incident. But before we start looking at this document, let's all see how this ties in. And I'm going to pass a discussion on to you, Jeff, to talk about the more recent documents that you've discovered, which deal with aircraft with nuclear propulsion patents, and a German scientist by the name of Helmut von Zabrowski. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Zabrowski?
So yeah, something like that, I think.
Zabrowski, who you're alleging was involved in the reverse engineering program involving crashed ET craft. So to kickstart off the conversation, let's look at Zabrowski. So he was involved with the development of the V1 and V2 rockets, which are the first guided missiles. Is that right?
Yeah, he was a contemporary of Werner von Braun and Kurt Debus.
Yep.
Both were paperclip scientists, and later on went and worked in high levels at NASA.
He wasn't a paperclip scientist, though, was he?
No, he was working for BMW at the time during the war, and he was at the rank of an Waffen SS captain. The factory for BMW was near Dachau, and they used prisoners from the Dachau prison camp in their manufactory. He was a rocket expert, and he parallel sort of worked on the ME-163 Comet, the rocket-powered plane. In the later part of the war, the Germans were concerned about the number of bombers coming over, and they wanted to develop a vertical takeoff vehicle to ascend, engage the bombers, and then drop down again. And that was his specialty: rocket engines and vertical takeoff.
Yeah, and so you found a document where that was published in the 90s about with his name and some of his patents, which was this document here by Bernard Snyder.
Yep.
So it's aircraft nuclear propulsion and annotated bibliography, and then you found this. Is this a patent, or is it?
He had over 300 patents, but these two here in particular, the bottom one, TRW, reference that or cites that research, that patent in its research for thermal nuclear reactors.
So what makes this guy interesting in the sense that gives you an inkling that he might have been involved in the program, which when we say the program, we're talking about the reverse engineering program of crashed ET craft.
So basically, after the war, I'm not sure if you saw that Dave Grush interview where they talk about Robert Sarbacker and Thomas Townsend Brown.
I did see it, yeah.
Yeah, when they go in behind enemy lines to capture the scientists. It was a bit of a free-for-all back in the closing days of the war. Everyone was in there trying to get all the good stuff, as they called it. Even John F. Kennedy was there with James Forrestal trying to find out what the Foo Fighters were. But Zaborski, because he worked at Dachau, it was a touchy subject with the Jewish community in the US. Seymour Hersh says in his book, The Samson Option, that one of the Israeli government officials said to him that we still remember the smell of Treblinka and Dachau. Next time that happens, we're going to take everyone with us. So because he worked at or used prisoners from Dachau, there was no way they were going to get him into the US. And because of what they call the Nuremberg ruling, which von Braun and Diebus and all the rest of them, they said they were honorary members of the Waffen-SS. So under that ruling, Zaborski, he was in jail from June 1945 to, June 1946 to August 1947. And he patented this nuclear propulsion system.
Sorry, Jeff. So he would have had to have gone to trial in the Nuremberg trials if he went to the States, or?
Well, I think because the decision came about von Braun and that, because he was honorary captain as well, that he got released. They didn't try to get him out, but I think they knew because of his association with Dachau that they wouldn't get them. It'd just be a bridge too far to get him into the US.
Right.
But he was in prison until 1947, and then he patented a nuclear propulsion system for an aircraft less than 5 years later. This is at the time
what makes that unusual?
That information wasn't. They hadn't even had a nuclear-powered submarine or a civilian reactor by that time, and somehow he knew how fission worked, and he had a lot of knowledge, and he claimed he was working on it since 1945. So just the timeline doesn't really add up with how we could know so much about nuclear propulsion, and that top patent was cited by 27 other developers, and that document that this comes from, it's a 300-page document, and there's about 10 projects on each page. So there was a massive amount of nuclear propulsion efforts underway, and they'd only got an atomic pile to go critical in December 1942. Like, that's like having a massive lump or pile of coal that you can burn and then suddenly thinking, oh, we should put this in an aeroplane. It just does not add up. You know, that they can make that. They had the turbine engine in the Messerschmitt ME 262. They had the Comet 163, the V2, and the V1, all with unique and exotic propulsion. But suddenly they want to, put a nuclear reactor in an aircraft. I think they found stuff, and I think the Twining document does say this, that the Cape Girardeau crash of 1941 in Missouri, it says, no technological gains were used from that except for the Manhattan Project. So I think they found a propulsion system in that crash, and that sort of led to the Manhattan Project.
So we've got the white hot report here now, and before we get into the Missouri craft, I just wanted to point something out to you. So they're saying here that landing zone 1 for this ULAT, which is a unidentified lenticular aerodyne. Don't know what T stands for. Is that test 1 or technology 1? So it said it landed in Socorro, which doesn't really match up with any of the Roswell craft, which we know one of them landed. Well, we don't know, but we're speculating that one of them landed in Corona or crashed in Corona. the other one crashed in, I think, Magdalena, and the debris field was in was it north of Roswell, 75 kilometers north of Roswell. So
Yeah.
how does this fit in? Like, I mean, I don't understand why they're saying Socorro, New Mexico.
I think it might have been just the general location. Not really
Right.
sure. Yeah,
Because Corona's about, if you look at the map, there's Socorro and Corona's over here. That's about 110 kilometers.
yeah.
So I'm just a little bit, was a bit confused by that.
And the second one, because I think there was two in Roswell, I believe, that came
Yeah.
down. The
Yeah,
second,
one was in Corona.
Yep.
Depends upon who you speak to, I suppose. And I haven't read. I read extensively in the 80s about it, but my memory is pretty. I don't know. I can't remember exactly. I read quite a few books on Roswell,
Yep.
but yeah. So yeah, I'm just a bit confused about that. But there's the document there, and again, we're talking about, I think, the Woods, Ryan and Bobby's father got this from Timothy Cooper, I believe,
Yep.
and they've rated it at an extremely high level of authenticity, which they say, well, this is the generalization here that I've written on the right-hand side. Means that they've done investigations as to the testing of the paper, etc., the ink. But we don't know whether this is an original document or not. I mean, I don't know. So all that might not have applied to this particular document. But they nonetheless, they've done some testing to say that it is mostly a highly authentic document.
Yep.
So I've just highlighted a couple of things here. Non-breathing aircraft, and maybe produced by an advanced culture from another planet.
Yeah, it's for me, it's an example of a typical counterintelligence operation where the Twining memo, which it was secret, that's what you'd send out to your allies, Canada and the Great Britain, because they were involved in the Manhattan Project, basically, and wouldn't give them all the details, but then you'd have a no-fawn document like this white hot report with all the details for dissemination just to a few people. And this part here is interesting: heavy water and deuterium.
Yeah.
So what I think.
Sorry to interrupt you. So the white hot report was written in what?
I think it was the 19th of September, 1947, and the
1947, right?
Yep, and
September.
the Twining memo was the 24th of September 1947. So they were within, I think, 5 or 4 days of each other. So I think the 19th was a Friday, so they banged that one out on the Friday and had to think about over the weekend what they were going to tell their allies, and then wrote the Twining memo. And that's what Harry Turner saw somehow.
That's what Harry Turner saw, yeah.
Yep.
And Bill Chalker had spoken to him about that, I guess.
Yep.
So going back to the Missouri 1941 crash, so you're saying that the propulsion system on that craft had it was a nuclear fusion, not fission reaction engine. Is that right?
Well, nuclear fusion was what Edward Teller was banging on about in the Manhattan Project, and he wanted to go straight for nuclear fusion. It was untested until 1952, so it was a theory that he had. Whether they tried to replicate a fusion engine, my personal opinion is they got it completely wrong and were thinking of using just the heat generated from the reactor in a turbine. But what's interesting here is that heavy water and deuterium, like scientists know that light water, which is H2O, and heavy water, which is deuterium-2 oxide or D2O.
It's got another
isotope.
Another neutron.
Yeah, and they're similar, but they're they don't have identical structures, and using quantum mechanics, the researchers have identified in 2008 there's several differences between the two water isotopes. So there's
you've got tritium as well, so that's got the 2 neutrons plus the 1 proton,
yeah,
and 1 electron.
But there's special quantum characteristics of deuterium oxide, which is D2O, used in that. They thought it was a nuclear reactor that produced heat, but I believe it produced something else. And we'll talk about that a bit after.
Yep.
These signatures here are interesting. You got Harry Truman's stamp there, approved. It's, he had a rubber stamp carved out with his signature on it that he used because he's. That's why the similarities there on across documents.
Yep.
You got Vannevar Bush next to him.
Yep.
Down the bottom there, you'll see
just up there, Vannevar Bush.
Yep. And then you'll see.
I couldn't work out these other ones.
Yeah, AC Wiedemeyer down the bottom, just below that.
That one there. Yeah.
Yep, that's Albert Cody Wiedemeyer. He was the general commanding the forces in China at that time.
Right.
And interestingly, when Thomas Townsend Brown started NICAP, as well as Admiral Hillenkotter on that board, Albert Cody Wiedemeyer was too, and I think he was the one that was backfeeding information about what was going on at NICAP to the intelligence services.
Yeah, I didn't know that Townsend Brown started NICAP until recently.
Yeah.
So it was so interesting when I heard about it.
Yep. So, yeah, and Wiedemeyer's got a connection with Marshall Carter, who was the deputy director of the CIA when JFK was assassinated, and also went on to become director NSA, and he was a fishing buddy of James Jesus Angleton. So it's a big boys club, this whole thing.
I might just for the audience who may not know what deuterium, tritium, protium are. So we've got normal hydrogen, I believe it's just got the 1 proton and the 1 electron. With deuterium, you've got an extra neutron, and with tritium, you've got 2 neutrons. And with nuclear fission, we've got, just to show you this little GIF, we fire a neutron into a uranium, is it 235?
Yep.
Isotope, and then it splits it up into, I've forgotten now. Do you know what it splits it up into? I've forgotten.
Yeah, barium or something like that.
Barium and chromium, is it?
Krypton.
Kryptium.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it lets off 3 neutrons, and then that is a chain reaction.
Yep.
And then we've got fusion, which is a different reaction. We've got a neutron going into is it deuterium?
Yep.
And then it lets off a helium and a. This is not labeled, but anyway.
That's deuterium and tritium, and that fuses to join to become helium, but with a extra neutron as a output, which is gamma radiation. So that's radioactive, and you need millions of degrees temperature.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about that molecule is the oxygen's got 8 protons and 8 neutrons. It's 2 K shell. Its K shell's got 2 electrons in it, so that's the maximum it can take. Its L shell has 6 electrons, but it shares 2 electrons with each of the deuterium atoms. Right. So that makes its L shell max at 8. And there's an interesting thing that could occur for cold fusion like that. And Farris Williams talks about this in his dynamic theory, aligning the spins of the atoms, and it's possible that when heavy water is spun in a donut-shaped appliance at a high speed, it produces electrical power, like it's 17.6 million electron volts of electrical power without the heat.
So you get a lot more energy out of nuclear fusion than you do fission.
But with this particular atom and molecule, you could potentially get it with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. The two protons and the two neutrons of the two deuterium atoms could combine up and share electrons and then become helium-4.
Right.
Without the millions of degrees of heat and without radiation.
Right. Yeah.
So
that's a lot.
That's another, the people, if these documents are hoaxes, that they only found the unique quantum properties of deuterium in 2008. If they hoaxed, it's just another good guess they did by putting, deuterium as the fluid in that donut-shaped device in ULAT-1.
Interesting. So the upshot is that basically you get a lot more cleaner energy out of nuclear fusion than what you would in fission.
Cold fusion without the heat, and the radiation.
The heat. Yeah,
that was in that report. They couldn't really figure out. There was no exhaust. They couldn't figure out how it worked. So they applied what they knew was a heat reaction engine in a turbine and tried to supplant burning chemical fuel in the turbine with transferring the heat from the reactor to the turbine. And it's because they didn't know that much about quantum mechanics at that time.
And this is Nathan Twining with that famous document, the Air Material Command, where he's stating the phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. So this is an actual document that is real. Yeah.
23rd of September 1947.
Yep. So this brings us to the MJ12 document, which is the air accident report by Nathan Twining, which is up in the air as to whether it's legit or not. But it talks about, I'll just highlight a possible atomic engine. So this is discussing the structure of the generator, I suppose. Sorry?
The device for propulsion.
The device, for ULAT-1. Part of the craft itself comprises a propulsion system, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It's saying that the craft itself, the shape of it, somehow contributes towards the propulsion system, and it's a donut-shaped tube that's about 35 feet in diameter, surrounded by a central core tube which is translucent. The tube appeared to be filled with clear substance, possibly heavy water. A large rod central inside the tube was wrapped in a coil of what appears to be copper material. And then it goes on to say a ball turret 10 feet in diameter in the middle of that. The main propulsion system is a bladeless turbine. Craft moves through air. It draws oxygen from the atmosphere. I suppose it's speculating there. And by induction process generates atomic fusion reaction. This air outside the craft would be the air outside the craft would be ionized, which might explain why we see lights in UFOs, I guess. A circular airfoil, absence of any noise. And I've done this diagram here, which is pretty bad, but I just put a couple of things together. So it's got this plastic donut-shaped 35-foot in diameter filled tube, which is full of deuterium. And then we've got a central internal rod, and I couldn't demonstrate the wire wrapped around it with a ball turret, which is in the middle of it, which is about 10 feet in diameter.
If you just go back to that, Rog, that picture. Yeah.
Yep.
I've got a statement here that I've written up. It goes for about 5 minutes, just describing what I think is actually going on there.
Sure.
All right. The electrostatic attraction between atomic nuclei and their electrons holds atoms together. Electromagnetism can be thought of as a combination of electrostatics and magnetism, two distinct but closely intertwined phenomena. Electromagnetic forces occur between any two charged particles, causing an attraction between the particles with opposite charges and repulsion between particles with the same charge, whilst magnetism is an interaction that occurs exclusively between charged particles in relative motion, which is important. These two effects combine to create electromagnetic fields in the vicinity of the charged particles, which can accelerate other charged particles via the Lorentz force. At high energy, the weak force and electromagnetic force are unified as a single electroweak force. The field of quantum electrodynamics, or QED, has modified Maxwell's equations to be consistent with the quantized nature of matter. In QED, the electromagnetic field is expressed in terms of discrete particles known as photons, which are the physical quanta of light. Today, there exist many problems in electromagnetism that remain unsolved, such as the existence of magnetic monopoles, and this part is key to the propulsion theory that I'm positing here. In particular, physics, a magnetic monopole is a hypothetical elementary particle that is in an isolated magnet, only has one magnetic pole, i.e. a north pole without a south pole or vice versa.
Yep.
A magnetic monopole would have a net north or south magnetic charge. In classical electromagnetism, Ampere's circuital law relates the circulation of a magnetic field around a closed loop, like we've got here, to the electric current passing through the loop. James Clerk Maxwell derived it using hydrodynamics in his 1861 published paper on physical lines of force. In 1865, he generalized the equation to apply to time-varying currents by adding the displacement current term, resulting in the modern form of the law, sometimes called the Ampere-Maxwell law, which is one of Maxwell's equations which form the basis of classical electromagnetism. An electrical generator or electric motor consists of a rotor spinning in a magnetic field. The magnetic field may be produced by permanent magnets or by field coils. In the case of a machine with field coils, the current must flow in the coils to generate or excite the field, otherwise no power is transferred to or from the rotor. The amount of electrical current, which is DC, is injected into the spinning rotor determines the magnetic field flux, which in turn determines the voltage induced in the stationary stator windings, which is the power output, the system output. Voltage is analogous to pressure in hydraulics, and current is analogous to flow. DC excitation is given to the rotor windings of a synchronous alternator because it allows for precise control of the rotor's magnetic field. Controlling the rotor's magnetic field by sensing the output voltage and either increasing or decreasing the current injected into the rotor, which controls the output. Therefore, the reverse may also be true. Rotation of molecules of heavy water, 2 electrons in the K shell, 8 electrons in the L shell, around a closed loop inside an electric current injected into the windings around the plastic donut that you've got here, may cause the electrostatic attraction of the deuterium protons and neutrons to combine using Heisenberg's uncertainty principle with 2 of the shared L electrons to give the appearance of a helium-4 atom, and to produce an electrical output of 17.6 million electron volts without the associated heat and radiation output. Incredibly high electrical power thus produced is in turn used to create an intense magnetic monopole field. The monopole created is the same polarity as the Earth's magnetic field in the region that it is operating in, i.e. if it's in the northern hemisphere, the magnet monopole is north. If it's in the southern hemisphere, it's south. And as like polarities repel each other, causes a compression in and around the bow of the craft and an expansion through the nozzle of the stern of the craft. And that's that 6-to-1 profile ratio they discuss in the White-Hot report, and propels it in the desired direction. There may be some type of gradient across the craft's outer skin to determine direction. this action causes atmospheric cavitation for the craft to travel within, like a vacuum bubble. And as there's no sound in the vacuum, there's no sonic boom. So that's what I think's going on with this device.
Wow.
So it's not heat that it's producing; it's producing a magnetic field. That,
yeah.
And so, because they didn't know this stuff back in 1947.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So you've just explained the physics of how this induction engine works, atomic fusion induction engine.
Yeah, because of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, they don't know where the protons and neutrons are of those two deuterium atoms, so it can appear to form helium.
Right.
And when it does that, that's when you get that 17 million electron volt discharge, which is captured in that coil wrapped around the outside and used as to generate a magnetic field, a monopole magnetic field.
I'll move on. So that's fantastic. So Zborowski's patents, so improvements in thermal nuclear reactors, in particular aircraft propulsion. So he mentions heavy water here, mixture of water and alcohol and methanol as a moderator. Do you want to explain what a moderator is? Because is that it just takes up the
slows down the neutrons.
Slows down the neutrons. That's it. Yep.
So yeah, you want to try and slow them down so they interact with the other atoms to split with infusion. Yeah. Most of the American civil reactors use graphite.
Yeah, and I think that there was a problem with graphite, wasn't there?
Well, produces plutonium, builds up in it. Yeah, so electrical production is a byproduct of the plutonium manufacturing. That's why they don't want many countries to have graphite reactors.
Yeah.
So yeah, in that patent, he goes right into depth of the stuff that's not commonly known at that time. They've only just, 1954 when it was granted. He wrote it in 1953.
Yeah.
The less than 10 years after the first atomic weapon was detonated. He seems to know all about it.
And so, what do you think he gleaned a lot of his knowledge out of the ULAT-1 craft?
Possibly, or the magenta one in Italy, maybe.
33.
Yeah.
So, do UAPs use nuclear scramjet concept that is applied to Earth's magnetic fields instead of air?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I think is happening.
Yeah.
Hannes Alfvén, he was the father of magnetohydrodynamics.
Yeah.
He actually, interestingly, developed these theories after watching coronagraphs of the sun that were taken by Donald Menzel, astronomer.
Right. MJ12 guy.
Who better to have on the team?
Yeah, exactly. As Stan Friedman used to say, he was extremely shocked that he was there because he was such a big debunker of UFOs.
Yeah. So yeah, Hannes Alfvén developed the magnetohydrodynamic theory, and that rod that was inside that donut that potentially could create a magnetohydrodynamic wave inside that, which is there's another document on the Majestic documents. It's from Nathan Twining to General Curtis LeMay, and it's 18th of July 1947, and it's Twining telling LeMay that they need to stand up a research centre from the Air Force Air Material Command at Wright-Patterson, or Wright Field as it's known, because they know there's something going on in the high atmosphere with electromagnetic and compressional wave propagation. And Curtis LeMay, he he didn't need to be briefed on it. He saw them with his own eyes during World War II. He was a colonel in charge of the 305th Bombardment Group in 8th Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
He had a high number of pilots that were aborting missions, either because of the flak or they were seeing foo fighters. And Robert McNamara was a statistician during World War II and later became Defence Secretary. He says the story that Curtis LeMay said to stop the high mission aborts, said every flight, well, now I'll be in the lead plane, I'll be flying as a lead pilot, air commander. Anyone that aborts gets a court-martial, and overnight.
I didn't know there were flights that were aborted during that time because of that. But anyway.
Well, that was the first Steinfurt raid on the ball bearing factory, the SKF factory in Germany. The second Schweinfurt raid was called Mission 115, and I got these details out of, I think it was the IPU report.
Right.
That they actually collided with Silver Disc and didn't damage the aircraft, but they made intelligence reports, and you can see them on the internet. They digitized those debriefs, and they reported it. And the colonel on that mission was Bud Peasley, and he later on, talked all about Foo Fighters. They didn't know what they were. So LeMay knew early on about, anomalous objects flying around.
Yeah. There was that also Barry Goldwater asked him a question, didn't he, at one stage, and he said, "Don't ever ask me that." Was that about the Blue Room in Wright-Patterson?
Yep.
So the Earth's magnetic fields are compressed and expanded in these as a method of propulsion, and we use air as a means of propulsion when we're not air, so they're not using air. And so what I've got here, note that Oppenheimer and von Karman thought that the actual body of ULAT-1, which was the extraterrestrial spacecraft, appeared to be part of the propulsion mechanism as well, which we'll look at in a minute. And this pinching effect method of propulsion is based on Hans Alfven's theory of magnetohydrodynamics and galactic circuits, which is really interesting. I'll have a look at that diagram in a minute, the galactic circuit. But let's look at the conventional engine, nuclear engine air power for a generic scramjet engine.
This is
so
actually,
do you want to explain this?
Yep, this is actually a Royal Australian Air Force document, believe it or not.
All right. Okay.
So this is a scramjet. You need to accelerate it up to supersonic speed because there's no actual moving parts in this. It just uses the force of the supersonic air coming in to compress itself, and then you inject fuel, burn it, and when you expand, when you burn fuel, you get expansion, and that expansion through the nozzle is what causes thrust and pushes it along.
So where's the direction? So the direction's this way, is it? Like it's in my cursor. So you got
blue
the
is there,
and
that's the exhaust. Yeah.
So the exhaust is here, so it's coming in from this side, so left to right.
Yep. So you can see the nozzle lets the expansion, and it's the expansion of the fuel burning that's causes the thrust.
Yep.
Which is the same as a turbine. A turbine does the same. It's got a compressor on the front connected to a shaft to a turbine on the back. Inject fuel in it, and it's the expansion of those gases. That's why it's called a gas turbine. It's not because they burn natural gas. They burn anything, pretty much. It's the expansion of the gas working on the turbine that turns it, and the turbine is connected to the compressor, so it compresses the air at the front, and the expansion at the back that creates the thrust. Or they use turbines in tanks and ships and all sorts of applications now. It's not just aircraft.
We'll have, sorry. Let me just go to the next slide on the hypothesis of the magnetic field pinching using magnetohydrodynamics that Hans Alphen. So instead of, do you want to explain this? So apparently the UAPs use this method of propulsion.
So those grey lines are Earth magnetic field. You can think of it as a cross section of a tube. So they're both the same polarity, the one above and below.
So
and
these two here, that one and that one.
Yep, they're the same polarity, but that that monomagnet that I was talking about before.
Like the monopole.
Monopole magnet. So the body becomes a monopole magnet, and it's the same polarity as those two lines. Yep.
Mm.
It pinches the intake coming down, but there could be a monopole at the front, which is the reverse, like the opposites, because it attracts and pinches them in, and then the gradient across the back expands it as a repelling force,
So
and that creates the
gradient
nozzle
here
on the body itself. Yeah.
Mm.
So it's pinching
on the body itself. So this
yeah.
is okay. So this is the actual craft, yeah.
The
and these are the
craft's
magnetic field lines of the Earth. Yeah.
Yeah, the craft's in the middle. So with that pinching effect, it could cause cavitation, which is like a vacuum bubble that it travels in, and it.
So the exhaust would be like. I'm a bit confused about how the exhaust. Yeah, you can get an exhaust because they've labelled it exhaust.
Yeah, it's just the expansion, like the pushing apart of the.
So they're pushing apart the magnetic field lines, of the Earth.
Yeah.
And that causes a propulsion system.
If there's a gradient across the body of like a monopole at the front that's opposite to pinch it, and then monopole at the back to expand it. So it's.
So how do they use this craft out in space where they're nowhere near a planetary magnetic field?
Well, that's what Hannes Alphen's saying is galactic. It's everywhere. It's throughout the universe. There's
the galactic.
There's a fields.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah.
Yeah. So
well,
it's
we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
I've got the diagram further down. So.
Yeah. And they somehow use these. This is like a magnetohydrodynamic field that it's using, created by that action of rotating heavy water in that donut.
Do you want to just briefly, and if I put you on the spot, just let me know, but do you want to just briefly explain what magnetohydrodynamics is in the normal sense of involving water and
yeah, it's sort of hard to explain.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I've seen it demonstrated in the video, but let's go back before. Now we know that this is a hypothesis of how the UAP craft works. I'm just going to have a look at this video, which is Operation Argus 1958, which I'm just going to show a little bit of this video because it explains the Earth's magnetic fields, and I'm just going to turn it on. We should have sound. Let me know if we don't, but started
illustrated by lines.
Around about.
Navy electrons produced by a nuclear-dimensional paper-flat plane like this. In a top or bottom view of the magnet, the field lines would be shown as a sort of fringe sticking out all around it. Actually, this concept of lines of force with spaces between them is misleading. There are no separated lines of force around a magnet, but only a zone or field of force. And the lines are a handy convention to indicate the relative strength and direction in which the field exerts the force in different areas. A close spacing of the lines is used to indicate areas where the field is strong. The Earth itself is a magnet. It acts as a dipole surrounded by a field of magnetic force. The directions in which the force acts are again illustrated by lines. The field lines at high latitudes were not involved in the Argus experiment, so for simplicity, we'll drop them out of the picture. Looking at this cross-section view, we see that the magnetic field extends a great distance from the Earth, so we need a number of layers of lines to show the strength and direction of the field at different altitudes. Remember that this is a cross-sectional view. Any one of these field lines can be thought of as lying in a shell, made up of lines of that particular size and extending to the same altitude all around the Earth. Perhaps the easiest way to visualize this is to picture each shell as roughly like a giant automobile tire around the world. The tire beads, which are the north and south edges of the shell, will describe rings on the Earth's surface corresponding to north and south geomagnetic latitude lines around the Earth. For the concept of many layers of shells, we picture concentric layers of tires, each nested inside of the next bigger tire. The magnetic surfaces and field lines illustrated by these tires are the foundations of our project. Accepted theory tells us that if a charged particle like an electron moves in a magnetic field, it may, under certain circumstances, be deflected into a helical or spiral path, winding around the imaginary magnetic field lines. As this previous chart showed, the Earth's magnetic field lines converge to a denser pattern at both their north and south ends. If a particle trapped in the Earth's field spirals into such an area where the field lines converge, the spiral gets progressively flatter and finally reverses, and the particle goes right on back the way it came, spiraling around the same lines, having lost very little energy from the change at the mirror point. Now, if we think of this effect in relation to some given magnetic line of force in the Earth's field, we see that such a particle might be trapped and mirrored back and forth for a considerable period, if the reversal or mirror point is located high enough, substantially clear of the atmosphere. If the mirror points are too low, the electron will dip into the atmosphere at each end of its shuttle and soon be lost by collision with air molecules. A mechanism similar to this is accepted as one of the causes of auroras. Streams of charged particles ejected from the sun reach the Earth and are trapped in some set of the Earth's field lines. Those particles with low mirror points hit and excite the atmosphere at each end, or conjugate point, causing the auroral glow. Aurora borealis in the north, and simultaneously an aurora australis in the south.
Now, Jeff, did you want me to continue on with this video, or?
I've got a thing from a book that Hannes Alphen wrote in the 1950s called Cosmological Electrodynamics, and it describes magnetohydrodynamic waves as oscillations of the magnetic lines of force. So a simple picture of the magnetohydrodynamic wave motion is obtained in the following way. The magnetic lines of force are often regarded as elastic strings. The force exerted by a magnetic field may be visualized by imagining that such strings attempt to contract and at the same time impose a lateral pressure on one another. If a magnetic field exists within a body of infinite conductivity, no change in the position of the lines of force can occur, since a change would give rise to opposing currents, which would be infinitely large as a consequence of the infinite conductivity. The lines of force are thus frozen in the body. So he's talking about the lines of force, and he wrote that in 1950, and I believe that's why they consulted him. I think it's in the IPU report about, he was the expert at the time. He was an electrical engineer. He discovered these plasmas during a hydroelectrical project he was working on, high voltage and DC. And he was interested in plasmas, which is, another thing that he, relates to UAPs.
Mm. So this is going back to the galactic circuit,
Yep.
which we can see observed So the observed radio emission of Cygnus A. So Cygnus A is our supermassive black hole in our galaxy or any galaxy. And so they can use, UAPs can use these, what are these lines referring to here? Are they magnetic fields as well?
Electromagnetic fields. Yep.
Electromagnetic fields that are exerted by the supermassive black hole.
Yep.
So they can travel intergalactically.
Yep.
How would they travel?
Magnetism is
galaxies?
like thousands of times more stronger than gravity. And the existence of celestial bodies with magnetic fields on account of their rotation was known by Michael Faraday from certain experiments they did called the unipolar induction. They knew that if you had a unipolar inductor magnet and rotated it like a cylinder, rotated it around itself and had a circuit connected up to it, there'd be a current induced in it. And the only way that could happen is intergalactically, not from just the Earth's magnetic field. So they've known for a very long time about that. But it's been forgotten. Hannes Alphen says in this book, this is like 1950. So, the fact that in the White Hot report they know it's not designed for air breathing atmosphere, that craft, like it's probably not a long range.
What does that actually mean? So I'm a bit confused. So it means that they've got no air in the spacecraft, or what does that mean?
No combustion, like air combustion. So it's uses some other motive force that.
Okay. So okay, I get you now.
Yeah. It's probably not, but they discussed later on in that report, I think, that there wasn't any stores or food, so it wasn't like a long range craft. They believe it was like a probe, I guess, from a forward operating base, either the ocean or maybe the moon or something like that.
Yeah.
But like the
how would the main I hate this word, mothership. How would that travel?
Well,
would it use the same principles or
possibly, yeah. Just
and so
amplify it or something.
Yeah. Fascinating. Oops.
Yeah, that's so you can see that it's been redacted there, but someone's helpfully written in the side magnetohydrodynamics. He's consulted in his work electrically conducting fields and fluids in magnetic fields, which is that donut-shaped thing with the heavy water in it. So they call it a fusion reactor, but there's nowhere for the heat to go. So it's like a cold fusion, and they can't work out how that works, but they still can't today. So
So the outer skin of the aerodyne, so just that the craft what's that? Moves through the air by magnetohydrodynamic something or other, because it's something else has been redacted there. It's believed that the craft travels through space by utilizing ionizing plasma and the planet's magnetic lines of force flow into the atmosphere. This may help explain how the fusion reactor can function in space environment. Oops. Just going back here. So let's go back into the how Dulles and Angleton were involved with co-opting Zabrowski in Frankfurt, Germany in 1957. Do you want to talk about that?
So Zabrowski's fairly well known in particularly Canada in the Avro
Aero car, yeah.
Yeah, Abrocard, TRW used his patents for that's Thomson Ramo Wooldridge, which their scientific division got spun off in 1960 as the Aerospace Corporation. So he is well known, and then counterintelligence in Germany reaches out. They're curious as to where his whereabouts and what he knows about nuclear reactors that the Soviets are using. So they do a trace, what they call a trace, and the Army counterintelligence unit told them that he was picked up outside of Dachau in June of '46 in prison. So they got their whole history there, where he went, who he was working for, even during the war. So Angleton's got an interest in him for some reason, and at the time, they're developing the Oxcart, which is the predecessor to the SR-71 Blackbird, and a nuclear engine for that would give it, almost unlimited loiter time. That's a project called Project 102, which was General Electric. It was called Heat Transfer Exchanger number 3, or reactor number 3, where there's a picture there of the 2 jet engines on a big reactor. Like, there's no way you could really fit it in anything other than a massive bomber. It was never going to really fit in a small, sleek craft like the Blackbird. But they were looking, they sort of had multiple things. That they pretty much developed Oxcart themselves, which was the name for the A12, slightly smaller, slightly thinner version of SR-71. So at the time, we know from letters between the CIA's Inspector General Lyman Kirkpatrick and the Deputy Director of Plans Richard Bissell that 1961 they'd been given a plot of land near the Nevada nuclear test site near Groom Lake. Lyman Kirkpatrick went there and sussed it out and had a few concerns about security, and talked about the Blackbird project, and Richard Bissell pretty much tells him to keep his nose out of technical business that's not his concern. So they didn't have Area 51. That's what, because Lyman Kirkpatrick says he's gone to the area, and then they were just developing Area 51. So they couldn't get Zaborski into the States, so they had to work elsewhere in Europe, and the European Research Office in Frankfurt was the ideal place.
Right.
Unfortunately, the CIA's first scientist they recruited, which was David Christ, which we touched on last time. Just before he gets his Q clearance, he gets a clearance to go to the plant, which is the Avion division of ACF Industries. They also had a nuclear division as well.
So sorry, where is the plant located?
It's 800 North Pitt Street, Alexandria, Virginia.
Right.
It's not there anymore, I've checked. But
Right.
AFC made tanks and rail cars and heavy industry. And like I said, with that document about thousands of projects for nuclear aircraft propulsion, they bought Avion Division just 1955 and amalgamated into aviation. So for some reason, David Christ's official duties was audio security engineer, but he's visiting a aviation plant here. He gets a Q clearance just after that. There's a special request from Herbert Scoville, who wants a joint effort between, I think it's Science and Technology Group and David Christ's TSS organisation within CIA. Herbert Scoville's replaced by a guy named Albert Bud Wielden, who Whelan, who is instrumental in not only SR-71 but also Pine Gap in Australia. So, and David Christ. I think Angleton made a deal with the Israelis because the Israelis were obviously concerned after the Suez crisis that they had no nuclear weapons and they had no delivery platforms anyway if they did. So they Angleton wanted to supply them with a nuclear weapon plus a nuclear powered delivery aircraft that had, almost unlimited loiter time as a deterrent.
So when you're talking about loiter time, it means it just doesn't land; it just goes round and round. It just
pretty much, stays in the air for
months.
100. Yeah. They say the only problem is the food, keeping the food up to the crew.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately, David Christ, he tries to get someone else to do a job in Cuba. He has an argument with a bean counter in one of the other divisions, and he's denied assistance, and so he goes and does it himself. There's a problem. He implanting a bug in a hotel.
So why? I don't understand why he went out there to Cuba to install that bug, and what was the bug for? Was it
Chinese
the
radio
Chinese?
station? Yeah. He tried to get someone else to do it, but the guy, in head of personnel, just flat out refused to let anyone else do it. So he decided to do it himself.
And that's how he got caught.
He went back twice, and the third time the Cubans were suspicious and arrested him.
Oh, okay. So he went back. He went 3 times, right?
Yeah. His cover was pretty much done by that time, I think.
Right. And so he ended up in jail. So this is he ended up in this jail here, which is the Pines prison, for 3 years. Isle of Pines, near the Bay of Pigs. Yeah, a fiasco.
That was, that the guards in that tower can see everyone in every cell, and he was a high value target. The Cubans knew that the Americans would probably come and try and get him, so they lined that entire prison with explosives.
Yeah,
they were going to blow it
I heard about that. Yeah.
And it was so close to the Bay of Pigs.
It was so clever, though. I mean, getting in and cutting the wires and everything surreptitiously without any of the guards knowing it.
Yeah.
But he didn't. Did he blow his cover? Like, I mean, he was under a pseudonym, which I can't remember what.
Daniel Carswell.
Carswell, that's right. And the other guys, Thornton Anderson and Walter Zeminski, also had aliases, but from what I can remember, they didn't actually blow their cover, did they? Or did the Cubans actually know who they were?
The newspaper, when they landed, when they released, blew their cover because they said CIA guy and named him, according to Alan Weberman, who's been right into David Christ.
What did the history books say?
Well, the CIA officially says he didn't give up, he didn't blow his cover, but he lied in his debrief, they said, and he was never allowed out of the country again.
Right.
He complained about that, so I don't think they're actually telling the truth. They're not, the Cubans would have extracted something. They knew something was going on. They had time. He was in prison for nearly 3 years, so.
So they extracted the information about the reverse engineering program that was going on.
I believe so. And John,
is there any evidence of that? Is that just a theory, a hypothesis, or?
Well, John McCone at the time was the Atomic Energy Commissioner, and he actually leaked the story of the Israeli atomic weapon program to one of Seymour Hersh's colleagues in the New York Times or Washington Post, I think it was. So they were trying to get ahead of the story because they figured that Christ had probably give up some information. So before the Soviets could use it as, it's even today it's still a sensitive subject for Israeli weapons.
So
because
the Cubans extracted the information and gave it to the Soviets about the reverse engineering program.
Yep. Oh, that's
so
what
what year was that?
He was captured in September 1960.
Yeah.
So yeah, McCain, he leaks the story about the Israeli program and then resigns 3 days later. JFK knows how controversial an Israeli nuclear weapon is. Angleton, his church committee testimony was declassified in December last year, and he says, yeah, we did help the Israelis with nuclear weapons. So it was, and there's a whole heap of stuff that's still redacted in that, in that testimony. So that's a problem, and that's where James McCord comes in, because James McCord was a protege of David Christ, also a audio security engineer with a Q clearance for some reason. So Angleton, in his testimony at the church committee, said that he used McCord twice, one in an extensive operation overseas that needed absolute watertight security, and we know from the declassified JFK's files that McCord was in Germany from 1962 to the end of 1963. And this sort of ties into some of the other CIA documents that the US Air Force started asking questions about Zaborski around 1962. So that Lyman Kirkpatrick that went to Area 51, he, as the Inspector General of the CIA, he wrote a pretty scathing report about the Bay of Pigs, which saw both Alan Dulles, the director, and Richard Bissell, who was Deputy Director of Plans. They both were forced to resign at the end of 1961. And this was, I think the final straw was that document where Dulles is saying to Kennedy, you don't have a need to know, and it's the Atomic Energy Act of 1954 that says, so Richard Bissell is replaced with Richard Helms, the CIA super spy, and that letter from the US Air Force asking about Zaborski goes to the Deputy Director of Plans, who is in charge of Area 51.
I'm going to just be the devil's advocate here. So if the Cubans had released the information from David Christ about the reverse engineering program in 1960, you said, is that right?
Yep. Over a period of time. He was released April 1963, yeah.
In our first episode, we mentioned that because JFK was interested in sharing information about, UFOs with the Russians, that got MJ12 a bit pissed off, and basically that's why they knocked him off. Wouldn't the Russians have already got that information from the Cubans?
Well, Kennedy probably didn't know that, or he might have knew that they had something, and it's, I'll show you what you've got if you show me what you've got type of thing. And that was, they'd gone to the brink of nuclear war at the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that's when Bluegill Triple Prime happened. They knocked one down, so maybe that brought them both to the table.
I can understand now the way you explain the physics of how the craft works with the magnetic fields, and how the magnetic fields of the Earth were disrupted due to the atmospheric explosion of a nuclear bomb. and how that could actually make a brick, like brick an actual UAP, in the sense that it's gonna, it's got no magnetic field there for propulsion, and then it'll just drop like a brick. I can understand that.
With unified field theory, if gravity and magnetism are inversely proportional, a lack of magnetism would cause a massive increase in gravity as well.
Oh, okay. So that, you mentioned that before,
Yeah.
So an increase in gravity, so that would actually contribute towards it falling like a brick as well.
Yeah. And so that's what Douglas Caddy said, that Howard Hunt told him the last time he saw him that these guys here, Frank Sturgis and Bernie Barker and the others and James McCord, the Cubans had also given information to Nixon's opponent in the 72 election, which I think it was George McCubbin, maybe.
Sorry, say that again. I missed.
The Cubans had given information to the Democratic National Party,
the DNC,
who were running against. I think it was George McGovern running against.
Yes,
Nixon.
It was George McGovern. But what did he do with that information? I mean, what he was supposedly, it was in the Watergate hotel, but why did that's still like a
I think it's just
very
the
sensitive.
CIA tripping over themselves, trying to, go in to see if there is anything in there, because it's got Nixon's fingerprints all over it. Because he started the program when, as vice president,
with
back
Eisenhower.
in Eisenhower, yeah. So, and he keeps they keep H.R. Haldeman in his book Ends of Power, I think it was, that said that Nixon, every time Nixon's on the Watergate tapes saying, the Bay of Pigs thing, that's a veiled speech for the Kennedy assassination.
Right.
So yeah, that's, McCord, he's got a Q clearance holder. He's one of the burglars. Frank Sturgis, well known. That Sturgis wasn't his real last name. Howard Hunt was quite an accomplished novelist, and one of his books had a character in it called Hank Sturgis. So Frank Sturgis changed his name to Sturgis. And that's
whatever happened to the documents in the water, like if they were documents that related back to the the Cubans, the information that the Cubans had about the reverse engineering program. What happened to it? It was in the Watergate building. What did the DNC do with that? Because that was a failed attempt at getting them.
That'd bring down the government, and if that information came out only what
do you believe happened to it? The information, if it was there.
Congress got together and buried it.
Right.
It'd destroy the country, and it probably still would. If that's why they're so scared of.
Yeah, I think it.
These majestic documents, all these things there's so many coincidences that the whole, Occam's razor thing that everyone loves to talk about. The simplest explanation is they're real.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely fascinating, and to get all this together, you're some sort of a genius, I reckon. I mean, this has just blown my mind, and I just cannot believe that you've pieced it all together in such a succinct way, and joined all the dots. Is absolutely amazing.
They don't put fluoride in the water in Darwin, Rog. That's what I'm putting it down to anyway.
I find it fascinating. It is really quite fascinating. And back in the news is the magic bullet as well. Did you hear about the recent one of the security guards saying that
Secret Service or something?
Yeah, Secret Service guy found that a bullet on the seat that was in the vehicle at the time, and he said that he put it on the stretcher that JFK was on. It ended up on the stretcher that I forgot the other guy's name. The other guy that was shot, but the bullet went through Kennedy and went Connolly,
Governor Connolly,
Governor Connolly. And that bullet just had striations of the barrel of a gun, but it didn't it appeared like a normal bullet, wasn't squashed or anything. And he was questioned by an interviewer saying, do you think it was just Oswald that was the single gunman? And he agreed that it was, but it just didn't make sense that this magic bullet was there, and I think he said he heard a noise over his right shoulder from the grassy knoll. So it's interesting how that's come up again, and he's kept his silence for 60 years, and now he's just come out recently and said that he did this thing of getting that bullet and then putting it on the stretcher and putting it on JFK's stretcher, not McCone's stretcher.
I think Curtis LeMay needs a bit more be put under the microscope. He flew to Canada the morning of the assassination, so it sounds like he was trying to get a getaway plan if it all went south. And then as soon as he heard of the assassination, he flew back to Washington. The logs of his Air Force aircraft document this, and then he got to Washington an hour before Kennedy's body came back, and he was actually in Bethesda hospital in the autopsy room. And the guy doing the autopsy, because there was someone smoking a cigar, the chief medical practitioner said, "Can someone get that guy to put that cigar out?" And the orderly went up to LeMay and said, "Oh, excuse me, sir, you have to put your cigar out." LeMay just took a big draw back and blew smoke in this dude's face and refused to pull it out, and then he was the one that started the whole nuclear propulsion program. It was at his behest that it started, and one of the first things JFK did when he came to power was cancel the whole nuclear power for aircraft program, because he said, it was 15 years, $1 billion worth, and you've given us nothing. So
was that the only reason that JFK wanted to?
Well,
the money or lack of productivity, or?
There was after $1 billion, nothing was spent, and that's what them guys at MIT, the Lexington group, had said. It's going to cost a lot of money, and you may not actually get anywhere with it. So, yeah,
interesting.
But the problem is, Roger, is that even if a few of the Majestic documents are real, it's entirely possible that the burned memo is real, and the American people might find this information difficult to swallow. But on November 22nd, 1963, military personnel, government-employed civilians conspired to perform an act of treason, the murder of the Commander-in-Chief, President John F. Kennedy. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah, it's interesting how all of history is tied into this bloody reverse engineering program of a spacecraft that crash landed, in near Roswell. It's quite fascinating. I
don't believe they've actually done anything, because how could they face every parent of their son or daughter's been killed in combat since X time? Your son or daughter had to die to protect our sources and methods. They could use that technology in any environment, and Afghanistan, whatever, and win, basically. I don't think they're smart, and that's probably the reason they're embarrassed that they couldn't figure it out. That's why they don't want to tell anyone.
And what did you think of the interview with David Grush? And I forgot the guy's name.
Yeah, that was awesome. That's what spurred me when he said, if you can see an inappropriate application of security, and the three-letter agency that did it, you can litigate. And I made a little video and put it on Reddit, and someone of high importance saw it and contacted me. So,
Right.
Yeah, it got wheels in motion.
Can't elaborate.
It'll probably come out shortly, I think, because in that NASA's come out and said, "Oh, we've got no data," and they've got tons of data from that event because there was 1,000 instruments all recording in different electromagnetic spectrums, and for some reason they released an unclassified version and a redacted version from two different aircraft. So they're backed into a corner. They can either say, "Oh yeah, we redacted that inappropriately because it was nothing," or they can, I'd be happy to be proven wrong, but they just have to redact it, which I know they won't. Not without a fight.
Yeah. And you got Lou Elizondo saying something about that as well. The Blue Gill Triple Prime incident as well.
Yep.
With Tom DeLong.
Yep. Yeah.
So he obviously knows quite a bit about the story as well.
Well, he was the one that put me onto it first. Just.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he said Starfish Prime, and I looked at everything, and that's when I saw the Bluegill Triple Prime because he got the date right, but the name wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. And yeah, just like, as you know, just in the last couple of hours, someone on Reddit, the user named Devolve, found a document that.
Yes, unfortunately, I didn't read it, but could you elaborate on what a paper trail to the
people requesting information on Zabowski from Richard Helms was the 1127th US Air Force Field Activities Group, and part of their remit is foreign materials acquisition or reverse engineering under Project Moondust.
Right.
So why would that entity want to know about Zabowski?
Yeah, I get you.
Yeah. And why would it go to Richard Helms? Wouldn't it be someone in counterintelligence or someone else, not the guy that's looking after Area 51?
Yeah.
And that's that was hive mind. I just put it out there. Can anyone find any reference to this? And they did, and it was awesome. And I'm still going through everything that they found. So and these documents, they were released under something called the Nazi War Crimes Act of 2002. And I don't know if you remember the last session we did on the burned memo, there was a tab there that said exempt from Department of Defense Directive 5200.1. This document also has that as a reference as why it can't be declassified, and I'm not sure why it did get declassified because there's a lot in there, which is strange, and something called Rodka material. I don't know what that means. I had a quick search, couldn't find anything. So yeah, interesting times.
What about I was going to talk to you before I forget, just briefly, because I don't know how long we've been going for, but I hope you're okay to still talk a little bit more.
Yep.
About metamaterials and how a piece of metamaterial was found and given to his name's just escaped me. He was looking at throwing terahertz frequencies at this metamaterial, and it acted as a waveguide.
Yep.
So I'm just wondering, how does that tie into the magnetic field propulsion induction method in some way?
Yeah, because I think the other material that it was layered with was bismuth.
Bismuth, yes.
Was
it zinc and bismuth?
I think so. Yeah, it was the most anti-magnetic. Yeah, it's the most anti-magnetic material that we know of, bismuth. So, yeah, there is.
What do you mean by anti-magnetic?
or it doesn't get magnetized easily.
Oh, okay, right. I get you.
Yeah. We've got a pretty high tech 3D printing. It's called Speed 3D. It was started in Darwin. It's Charles Darwin University, and it sprays metal powders, like bits of metal. And I've actually asked them to see if they could emulate something like that, but it's a bit hard to spray bismuth at the moment, but it's getting there. So yeah, was it Gary Nolan that was looking into that, or
Yeah, I think it was Hal Puthoff.
Hal Puthoff? Yeah.
Yeah, he did quite a bit of work on that, and he said that it acts as a waveguide with terahertz frequencies. But what was I going to say? Basically, that also you can't manufacture something like that efficiently on Earth because of the fact that you can't get zinc and bismuth to bond. I think, to bond. Sorry. Which is interesting, and obviously, I think there were a few debunkers that said, "Oh, yeah, it's just
slag or something."
Slag, yeah.
So metamaterials equivalent of swamp gas.
Slag that has a wave, acts as a waveguide with terahertz frequencies, and geez, what the hell? So yeah, it's interesting, but yeah, I just wanted to throw that past you.
Yeah.
Well, I think, yeah, go ahead.
It's the whole metamaterials thing. There's some of them dirds that came out from Robert Bigelow. There's some interesting stuff in there about electromagnetically induced transparency, slowing down light waves. Yeah, that's a whole nother episode, I think.
I think so. Well, absolutely fascinating. I mean, I just don't know how you do it, to be honest. My brain is just, I feel so insignificantly, I don't know. I just feel really dumb when it comes to this. But you've done a fantastic job with this, and credit to you that you've done all this research, and it's something like it's something that you've done on your own, and you've had very little help, and I think it's fascinating. It all fits together, and it ties in with history as well as physics, and it's just mind blowing. It's just absolutely fascinating. But whether it's true or not, well, we've just got to dig further, and it's something that you can continue researching, and we should have another episode of this. And so I thank you very much for joining me tonight. It's a pleasure having you, and I really enjoyed this discussion. It's quite fascinating, and we'll definitely have you back on if you dig deeper into this rabbit hole and find more information. But
thanks for having us. It's always good talking with you, Roger.
No worries. Hang around, because I'm just going to stop, and then I'll have a quick chat before you go. Just but thanks very much for that, Jeff. 1 second. Thanks, everyone. And I'm just going to stop this recording now.